Hello there! Hey everybody, welcome to another Star Wars Enthusiast podcast. Yes, that's right, you've been joining me for the streams, you've been joining me on YesDearProductions for the past month or two, and now I'm really excited to say we're finally kicking off the podcast that I've been hinting at for, 2.5 months. Super excited to be here today. Another Star Wars Enthusiast podcast is a podcast that is strictly about Star Wars content. It's an excuse for me to not bother my wife with Star Wars facts anymore. And she's not here today, so this is perfect. Today I'm joined by a really good friend of mine, Taylor Field. Taylor, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Taylor, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh gosh. Well, yeah, my name is Taylor Field. I am a Star Wars fan. And if you may recognize me in some shape or form, you probably know that I am from another podcast, GeekVerse podcast, and we do lots of Star Wars talking over there and all this kind of video game stuff. And I've been graciously invited onto this show to talk about Star Wars with Liam, and I've been wanting to do this for a long time.
I've been counting down too. I've been really looking forward to this. So, because I wanted to start things off with a bang, this being, the kickoff episode, I want to start off with possibly one of the most loaded topics in Star Wars, Order 66. Order 66, what is that? What was that? Order 66 was this contingency order that existed, that was created by Sheev Palpatine as part of the Clone Initiative, as kind of a contingency plan to take care of the Jedi should they try to seize control. Originally, it was written to be this contingency plot, but in reality, it's actually Darth Sidious's major plan to straight up overthrow the entire galaxy, create his own version of that, and bring the Sith into the light. Originally, it kicked off with the successful turning of Anakin Skywalker to the dark side, and that's literally how it all began. Like, Order 66 starts with one guy deciding this kid needs to be a Sith, makes him a Sith, and now we end up with something that is later referred to as the Great Purge. So straight up, I just want to lead off by saying, like, that whole thing, the whole fact that not only did he create a massive clone army, and not only did he do everything in secret, he created a contingency order that nobody knew about, that literally overthrew an entire order. Like, that's huge, right? That's possibly one of the biggest things I've ever heard of before. It's credit to Palpatine, obviously. Like, he came up with this incredible plan. But what I immediately become concerned about is, how do you hide that kind of information? Like, Taylor, how do you think he would have hidden that kind of crap?
Well, it's definitely on like a not like even in like a need to know basis. I mean, when you look at like this plan set in motion, obviously when Maul was his apprentice, he didn't even, and now as we know for sure in the Clone Wars, we know that Maul was devoid of that information as well. He knew that the purge would have happened, or there was some plot to take out the Jedi, but through the clones and through Order 66, he had no knowledge of that information. So it's, to hold a secret like that, it's such a galactic scale secret. Only a few know, such as the Kaminoans, obviously Prime Minister, he knew, and obviously Count Dooku, and apparently every single clone knew, but it just wasn't, they had nightmares about it, but it wasn't something that they could, access, like, oh, we're aware of this.
That was the inhibitor chip at work, though, right there. Yeah, like, so that was actually really interesting, is when they started talking about the inhibitor chips and how they're repressing the ability for the clones. Supposedly, they're meant to restrict the clones from thinking for themselves, but we see, especially in characters like Rex and Wolf, and even in Cody throughout the Clone Wars series, those clones did not have any problem thinking for themselves. It wasn't inhibiting their self-control, obviously. It was just stopping that one order from being something they could react to. Just jumping in on that Clone Wars comment, like, if you actually look at it, the Clone Wars series really painted a completely different picture of what Order 66 would mean for all of those Jedi. Because, literally, you're looking at a series that lasted 7 seasons over the course of 3 years, constant wars, constant battles of clones putting their trust completely in these Jedi commanders, and the Jedi commanders trusting these soldiers that literally they've been told will obey everything they say. They're just controlling this tiny little minute scale version of all of it, though, but it's like it's constant. these characters are growing relationships with these clones, and these clones are becoming their own people, and they're growing relationships with the Jedi again, right? So eventually it comes down to, well, what does it come down to? It comes down to one word from one glowing blue image in a guy's hand. That inhibitor chip was doing a lot of work. And
Yeah.
they were putting them in every clone, even the ones that didn't make it out of the wars. Like, that's another thought, too. Like, the amount of resources that had to go into developing that chip, installing that chip in literally every... Actually, how does the cloning process even work? Like, it's tiny little... It's the equivalent of a full birthing process, isn't it?
I believe so. Yeah.
So they're fully birthed and everything like that. Actually, now I'm going to tangent a little bit because I have to. Can we just talk for a second about the cloning process? Because the cloning process, the way they describe it in some of the comics and some of the later books, the clones ran out because the DNA strain got too weak. That's the thing that I've heard.
That is true, and I think that might be more of a Legends kind of direction.
Because that's not how science works. That's not how DNA works. I had to go on that little bit of a tangent there because it bugs me. You know, DNA coding doesn't work that way. Anyway, back on topic, I guess. Sorry, that's gonna happen a lot. I'm gambling here, but yeah, like, so let's talk now about what that meant for the clones, though, specifically, because the clones who have been following these commanders, not blindly, but have been following these commanders, have thrown all of their trust into them, are now suddenly being told, kill them all, and they're just following that order. We kind of see it in a little bit of Rex at the end of the Clone Wars series, of course. But what do you think that was like for some of the clones that remembered? Like, that followed the Purge orders? Like Cody. Cody's an example I keep thinking about. How do you think that impacted him going forward? Because I know there's some stuff that's been hinted at in Legends. I know there's some stuff that was hinted at in canon. But what do you think the impact was for the surviving clones that had, yeah, like Cody, that had literally fought in the Clone Wars since day one? Right next to, like, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who shoots him off a wall with a giant cannon, by the way.
So, for me, I feel like the Clone Wars version of Cody was just synced so well with the movie version, the brief movie version that we got of Cody in Revenge of the Sith. And I feel like, he's got that helmet on, and I just feel like it would have just been like this wall shielding from any form of emotion, and it just... He would have I mean, in the movie, you see it. He does it, and he doesn't think twice about it.
No.
So that kind of, to me, fits with how he goes along, even throughout the Clone Wars, working under Obi-Wan. He's very order-directed. He's very, straightforward. This is what we got to do, objective-based. And for him to just turn like that, it's... I think, again, like, it stems on the leadership that they had too, because that's how Obi-Wan was, and who the Jedi were. That funneled down into their like generals and their commanders.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's why with Rex, like, he was crying, and that's why with, like, obviously with Cody, he was just very much like, orders are orders. We need to obey the way things are going, and we need to just execute this. And I think a good kind of early foreshadow of this, obviously, in the one Clone Wars arc, when you see... I can't remember his name, but he was the one who shot one of the twin Jedis on the front lines with Anakin, and Fives is the one who tackled him to the ground. Now, that like wall of emotion that just transferred over him, and he did that execution, that's how I kind of envisioned Cody being in that scenario, because it's not like they turn into bad guys, but it's like, okay, for them, this order just implies that their generals are now traitors, and they, like, need to be executed. And it's like... It's weird because this inhibitor chip just changes their emotion and their perspective. But as soon as that's removed, it's like, no, I'm sorry. I can't believe I did that. Like, you see that with Rex. So,
oh, yeah. I actually kind of saw that a little bit in Jesse, too. Like, you remember Jesse kind of took over from Rex, and the second Rex was gone, like the second he was no longer following the order, we see Jesse kind of take over that leadership position. And he was that Stonewall... ARC trooper that's directing his soldiers to do the task they've been given to do. And I found that kind of interesting, actually, because literally this, like, an episode before, we're seeing Jesse getting interrogated by Maul, where Maul actually finds out what the grand plan is, what the grand design is, of course. And it's because he extracts exactly what Order 66 is going to be, despite the inhibitor chip, like, stopping that. And I found that really interesting as well, because that means Maul knew exactly how to react to all of it before it was going to happen, so he knew it was going to happen. But it was also interesting to see how Jesse's character evolved in like 2 episodes. Literally, in 2 episodes. He went from being a devout server of the 501st, which we could see, or I guess the new special contingent that was Ahsoka's contingent, to being the perfect ARC trooper, following the order given by his commander, which at the time was Rex, to the T, and enforcing it despite Rex's sudden turn. Because, like, there's that dialogue scene with Rex and Jesse as well, where Rex is saying, Ahsoka is not a Jedi, we don't have to kill her. And Jesse's saying, you said kill her, we're killing her. And I think that in and of itself was another interesting way they could have gone with that. Like, because Jesse is... We don't know a lot about Jesse. We didn't see as much of Jesse over the course of the series as we did of, like, Rex or Cody or even fucking Wolf. Hell, we saw more of Commander Fox, and we barely saw Commander Fox in the series. But we got this impression that Jesse was a very, very devout, very loyal soldier and would follow his commander's orders at all times. And we got that from a very brief period. So seeing the turn in Order 66, especially from I follow the head of command to I follow kill the Jedi Order, regardless of what else gets said, I thought that in and of itself was very true to character, despite us knowing little, but also very interesting how you could see like Rex tearing up when he tells her to find clone trooper CT-5555. It's 4 5s, right? Yes,
it's 4
5555s. Like the message about him, and then Ahsoka finds that, gets the whole information, and knows to help Rex. Actually, that's another thing too. I wondered about the Bad Batch and how they reacted, because Fives doesn't have the inhibitor chip anymore, does he? He's kind of a android, I guess, or a cyborg.
Well, that's not Fives, that's Echo.
That's true, that's Echo. Yeah, sorry. Wait, no, Fives didn't make it, did he?
No, he was about to tell the truth to Rex and Anakin, and then he got popped by, was it Fox that took him down?
Yeah, it was Fox and the Senate guard that got him, so I forgot about Fives and untimely demise. Damn it, because Fives, I would have wanted to see that arc. Fives during the arc of Order 66 without his inhibitor chip and seeing what happened. Unfortunately, we never got to see that. We only got to see what happened when the inhibitor chip got removed. We know that Gregor and Wolf got theirs removed as well. I'm curious to see if there's any kind of future content that comes out about that. Of course, because as it's actually, I don't remember if it's canon still or if it's just Legends, but I remember that at one point it was said that the clone troopers, some of them were kept on to train the new regiments of stormtroopers, including Commander Cody. And Commander Cody being cited as having said, yeah, there was no way a stormtrooper would ever keep up with a clone. They were just not meant to do so. And it's just, I'm obviously misquoting it, but the reality is that there's a quote attached to Cody talking about how the Jedi were better generals, how clone troopers were better than stormtroopers and always will be. And I like to think that, by extension, it's kind of his own weird way of feeling remorse about the actions he committed, is just constantly shitting on stormtroopers and what they do and what they stand for, which I found kind of interesting. But then I still wonder, too, to some of those other commanders that would follow blindly. Like, look at some of the other commanders that were out there and some of the Jedi generals they were associated with. Like, Plo Koon, because he was buddied with Ahsoka so often, I immediately wonder if his clone commander, which I don't actually know who the commander of his forces was during the events of Order 66, but I'm wondering if maybe his forces also had that moment of weakness or had that moment of pain when they had to execute that order. Because Plo Koon was another one of those Jedi that was really close to his soldiers. Like, Obi-Wan was very orderly, but Plo Koon was very defensive of the clones, which I liked. I liked that about Plo Koon. It kind of also was reflected in his training style of Ahsoka in the very brief periods they interacted and all of that. Do you by any chance know who his clone commander was? Because I know at one point he was paired with Wolf, but I don't know.
That's what I've always associated with is Wolf, because isn't his like his fighter squadron called like the Wolf Pack? Isn't that what they're called?
But I don't remember the Wolf Pack imagery being on the helmets of Plo Koon's team when that scene happened.
I know, and I'm wondering maybe it's just because they didn't have, like, because the Clone Wars wasn't out yet, or at that point, was it? Or so maybe they just didn't have the imagery.
Clone Wars, the movie, came out, but I don't think the rest of the series was out yet. So we had Commander Cody for context, but that was about it.
I'm wondering if it was just maybe they didn't have the imagery, because I assumed that that was, but you're right. The clones in the movies really, aside from like the 212th, you don't really see any distinct markings on them or anything. It's only Obi-Wan's troops that really showcase that. So,
You barely even see the designations between commanders and enlisteds. Actually, you don't see very many of the ARC trooper skirts or anything like that. So, yeah, you know what? You're probably right. It probably was a little more just they lacked the idea for the imagery at the time, but I still like to think that perhaps the Wolfpack had some seriously strong inhibitions about, like, had some issues with killing Kuhn, because Plo Koon
mhm,
was, like, Plo Koon was a very much a guiding force for that squadron, and I mean, it explains why Wolf would obviously remove his chip as soon as he figured out he could, and would
mhm.
probably feel shitty about it. But you know, I found myself wondering maybe they didn't station him with Wolfpack, and maybe that's why we didn't see that imagery, because that kind of gives me a weird bit of hope for Wolf. But I know Wolf is also in Rebels. If we flash forward, Rebels is also the first one to say, "Okay, no, we don't want to deal with this. Throw the Jedi right under the bus. We don't want to deal with this," which to me just kind of defeats the purpose of the character if he had tried to stand up for Plo Koon. But he also helps the rebels eventually, and he does go on their side. So obviously he feels some remorse for his actions. So it's like we can see that. Well, I mean, Gregor was just insane, but uh, we can see that in some of the commanders for sure. We couldn't as much see the remorse because we can't see what they were actually like during the events of Order 66, but seeing that as the aftermath, at least we got some hope from that. But
Mhm.
yeah.
Well, with Wolf's scenario, he's just, especially in Rebels, I always get this kind of like this PTSD, like it's just emanating off of him, that he's just
Mm-hmm.
gone through so much, and like he has this direct order that the Jedi are bad, and then this other order from his trusted friend Rex saying, we need to do this, it's the right thing, and he's just conflicting even without the inhibitor chip still in his mind. But when you look at like Plo Koon and how he was like in that one episode, and I resort to this all the time when I'm talking Clone Wars. It's
Yeah.
his men, and I think that when they were facing the that new separatist dreadnought that had that EMP weapon, and they were
Right.
floating in the escape pod, and he's like, we're just clones, sir, we're expendable. And Plo Koon says, not to me. That kind of thing funneling down into Wolf's men, and like that kind of energy is just so powerful. And to me, like when with Wolf, it just makes sense how, if he was obviously apart from Plo Koon, how his transition could have been a little bit more easier for, like, I'm assuming Rex approached him, maybe even like tackled him to the ground, and then just got the chip out of him and just said like, hey Wolf, this is how things are, you need to believe me, like I've been your friend for a long time. Because you can't have this conversation while the chip is inside their minds, because I mean,
They're
look
not
at Jesse,
listening.
for example.
Yeah, we
Yeah, they're
definitely
not
saw that
listening.
in Jesse. They don't give a shit at that point. They're not
Yeah.
listening. They're very much the task is kill the Jedi. So,
Hmm.
oh man, that actually that's a good thought too. Is like, how did they get the chip out of Wolf? With Gregor, I kind of just assumed Gregor just got shorted. Because
Yeah.
Gregor's like, we see him, he's batty. He's batty as all hell. And so I just kind of assumed his chip got shorted somehow. But with Wolf, Wolf was a very level-headed commander, right? So when we look at Wolf and Plo Koon's relationship, and if we do assume, let's assume for a second that Plo Koon and Wolf were separated during the Clone War or the 66 execution, Wolf is living with the knowledge that Koon is no longer alive. Plo Koon is no longer around, and he is somehow apprehended by Rex and Ahsoka, which we're assuming they somehow got off that planet they crash land on, and that is initially what leads to them recruiting Wolf and then finding Gregor. I would argue by accident, just because. Why not? Getting the chip out of him so that they could have that conversation. How do they go about doing that? Do we just have Rex jump him and zap him with a stun ray? Do we have Ahsoka do something to intervene somehow? I feel like they couldn't be in the same place. Like they
Hmm.
can't have Rex and Ahsoka in the same place getting Wolf on to their side, but you got to wonder how would they approach that? Why would they even bother to think we need to find Wolf?
Hmm.
Um, Now I'm guessing, I'm gambling here. This is definitely a shot in the dark, but it's a hope I have. I'm hoping we get a Order 66 aftermath comic book or novel series where we just kind of find out what happened to the clones that were active participants in Order 66 as commanders, but also actively involved in rebels as support units. Like, just even a single novel where we just get 6 parts. We get 6 clone stories. We get Rex's escape from the planet. We get Commander Cody and training the stormtroopers. We get Commander Wolf and his recruitment to Cody's team. We get 3 other troops. I'd like to know what happened to Commander Fox.
With Fox, I think he little side tangent.
No,
With Fox, I believe there is a comic of him when Vader was first being Vader. I think Fox ordered his men to attack him, thinking he was a Jedi, and that backfired.
He definitely died. Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah, no, you're right. Fox is super dead.
Yeah.
No, I totally forgot. I think I actually have that comic book on my shelf too, and I just totally forgot about it. But yeah, that's in the Darth Vader comics, and you are absolutely right. Yeah. So yeah, but even give me the story. Like, I'd like to see that story, because I know when Vader's first being Vader, it takes place a little while after the events of Order 66. We've obviously had time for him to get stormtroopers by the time he gets to the planet. He gets to the planet where he finds the Ahsoka's old lightsaber. Like, there's going to be some time passage. I'd like to see some of that stuff, obviously, in another comic or in a novel. But that's just me wishing. But you're totally right about Fox being super dead now, because he is like super dead.
Yeah.
But that brings me into another interesting point, though. Talking about the Jedi and the clone connection, let's talk a little bit about the Jedi during those events. Like, some of the Jedi, like, remember, when we're referencing the movie, we'll reference Revenge of the Sith for a minute. When we're referencing the movie, we remember Yoda's breakdown on Kashyyyk when he feels all the Jedi dying. We remember Ikadi Mundi realizing what was happening, turning around, and actually taking some of the clones down. Aayla Secura being killed on Felucia, which breaks me every time. We remember Plo Koon being betrayed by the fighters, but we also have a lot of survivors that made it through the Purge. So, like, Yoda is included. Obi-Wan surviving the fall from the freaking cliff wall when Cody's attack didn't work. Ahsoka Tano managing to save Rex and crash the ship and survive. Like, we also saw it in Fallen Order, and I'd really like to talk about Fallen Order specifically for this moment. Let's take a look at specifically the evolution of Cal Kestis throughout the game. As we're playing through Fallen Order, you know, he's remembering stuff that he's repressed, and we're seeing memories of him with his master training on what we're assuming now, well, we know now, is I guess it's a Republic Star Destroyer. And the clone involvements, walking through the shit. Like, this is the thing. We're talking about a Padawan. We're talking about like a 9-year-old kid, 10-year-old kid, walking through the inside of a ship before the events of Order 66, going to train with his master, and you talk to all those clone troopers, and you just have all these brief conversations, but you can tell these clones are a part of this kid's development, and that seriously gotta hurt, right? The moment they betray you, because you obviously we've both completely played through Fallen Order at least once at this point, probably more times at this point. We've both lived that experience more than one time. When you first went through it, did you feel like Cal's connection to those clones was kind of like Big Brother, Little Brother almost a little bit? Because I kind of got that impression.
100%. Oh yeah, with Cal Kestis, he'd be the same age as Kanan during this time, so both of them would share this equal experience and have that damaging reflection of these clones. That Big Brother aspect, you're 100% right. And when they turn, on Cal, it would be so mentally damaging to him for trust and for just so many aspects on life. The only person he felt like he could trust and look up to was this father-like figure who, what is it, T'Pol? I can't remember his actual name. T'Pol, okay.
Jaro T'Pol, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, he you can see throughout the course of that mission for Cal when the clones are turning and he doesn't comprehend what's going on. His force connection isn't strong enough like his master to sense the huge betrayal, and his master just raises his hand and says, silence, and he's just holding his head. And what do? You just see your commander just get executed by your master. It's like being I don't even know how to explain that in equivalency to our world. It just would be so confusing. So
It'd be quite literally like a sibling turning on you all of a sudden and seeing your father kill your brother right in front of your eyes. It'd be like literally watching that. And it's not because of bad blood in the family. It's because this is a family that's suddenly tearing itself apart in the
yeah.
most aggressive way possible. Like, I remember playing through the rest of that sequence too. You know, you're jumping from room to room. It's very much a go, go, go. You don't stop for a moment. And that's exactly how I envision it would have felt for any of the Padawans that survived. Like, if we look down the list, you know, there's more than just Cal Kestis surviving. You pointed out Kanan Jarrus is one of the major survivors. Ahsoka Tano, although she was no longer technically a Jedi or a Padawan, you know, she was having that same experience. Rex was, I would argue, they were really tight. Like, Rex and Ahsoka were basically brother and sister in the most powerful of sense. And you're seeing it in all of these Padawans, especially. It's heartbreaking. You're feeling their spirit being destroyed. You're seeing their very energies falling apart at the seams, and you're just experiencing the most vivid turn. And it feels worse than a parent, you know, killing you. Almost, it feels worse than being the victim of anything else, because you're seeing your siblings almost turn and destroy the closest you've had to a parent figure. Because a lot of these Padawans, you know, they're taken away from their families as very small children. Like, if we reference real quick the Purge at the Jedi Temple, a whole room of younglings, and that's another good example, actually. A whole room of younglings suddenly realizing, oh my god, we're about to be killed by a bunch of stormtrooper-like things, like these angry things in helmets. They have no expression and no remorse, and they're all coming after us. You know, we're talking a room full, like, of 20 kids, like 8 to 10-year-old kids, probably younger in some cases.
Yeah.
And they're all experiencing this. Like, obviously none of the younglings made it out of the temple, but imagine, if you will, any of the Padawans that were out in the world seeing this happen and having a minute to try to react and not knowing how. That paralysis would set in so fast. But they have all these heightened senses, so they're experiencing everything in an almost triple from what everyone else would see. And it would make sense. So I'm going to reference Legends. I wasn't going to reference Legends, but I'm going to real quick. We can even see it in a character like Maris Brood. It's painful. It's heartbreaking, and it's accurate. Maris Brood is one of the examples. Of course, naturally, you'd fall into the dark side trend if you could. Like, because it would be a natural response. You follow instinct instead of training. So seeing the Jedi like Kanan Jarrus or like Ahsoka or Cal Kestis, who stuck to the light as opposed to falling to the dark. Like, when you look at Talon on... Or it's not Talon, it's Terran, I believe, on Dathomir. When he was studying Dathomir's witches and everything like that in Fallen Order, he just went all in on the dark side thing, but he survived the Purge as well. Like, he's a Jedi Master, Jedi Knight, Jedi Force researcher who developed his dark side powers by studying the witch's magic on Dathomir. And you can see how some Jedi reacted poorly by doing that, but others, like the Padawans, just kept going. Yeah. They had to find their own way. And in some cases, that's a good thing, right? Because you get good characters out of that. You get good, compelling backstories. But then I look at characters like Cere Junda. You know, Cere from Fallen Order, she lost her Padawan because she was trying to protect too many, and that's how we ended up with the Inquisition. Like, the Darth Vader's Inquisitors were... By the way, those are intimidating, and I love those characters. But though that kind of thing, like seeing how a master like could fall into its own kind of trap from that. Like, let's talk for a second actually about the Inquisitors and Cere Junda and Darth Vader and all that. Like, we see a lot of different ways that it was handled, the surviving of the Purge, obviously, from the Padawans to the Masters. Characters like Cere, she lost her Padawan after the Purge, but she survived. And she's living with the survivor's guilt, almost. But she won't touch the Force anymore, and she's too afraid of the dark side. Like, do you think that was a problem for any of the other survivors? Because we know that Yoda was fine. And we know that Obi-Wan was fine, too. But do you think any of the other Masters that survived would have also fallen into a similar trap that Cere kind of did?
I think it's very easily possible. I mean, for the most part, I think the only Masters of the Jedi Council that survived, to my knowledge, would have been Yoda and Obi-Wan. I think all the rest, Palpatine made sure to place them on missions in certain scenarios where they would be executed, because the Jedi Council was his biggest threat. Jedi altogether, yes, but he had contingencies to take out Knights and Padawans. It was just at the core, the Council and the Masters that are the dangerous ones, that could reproduce, the idea of Jedi and the Force. And so I think it could be possible for some to have fallen down a dark path or cut themselves off, but I think, again, with no masters left in the picture, I think, for the dark side, Vader and Palpatine, I think they're looking at, okay, we've executed more than 10,000 Jedi. Any that have survived, we probably can execute them if they're very resistant, but we could also maybe try to tempt them and turn them, because if they survive and they're strong, and we could turn them into Inquisitors. So it kind of, I think it broke off in the two paths, because Seer, didn't they kind of Vader hinted at her being a powerful Inquisitor or something along those lines?
So Vader, when he caught Seer and turned her Padawan, had said because she was a knight, she was a master, she was training a Padawan, she could have made an excellent Inquisitor, and he was trying to break her. But because he'd already captured Seer's apprentice, he kind of had something already on her, which is why she reached out and used the dark side to break herself out of the situation. But it was her own rationale that led her to cutting herself off from the Force, because, I can't use it. It's too dangerous. And that worked for her. But with the Inquisition being, the Inquisitors being the fallout from that, we see with the Grand Inquisitor, we're talking a Temple Guardian.
Yeah.
The guy was not an active participant in the war. He was a guard at the Jedi Temple, but he was trusted, and that made him very dangerous. Not necessarily very force powerful, but very effective at dealing with things. Because a lot of the Temple Guards, if I'm remembering this correctly, which, mention it to me if I'm getting this wrong, guys, because I'd love to do an episode on the Temple Guardians, but the Temple Guardians were a little less force inclined and a lot more lightsaber inclined. They're very martial as opposed to all around Jedi, which made them very effective for dealing with most common threats. Which is still why the Grand Inquisitor was a very powerful threat, because instead of a Padawan turned Inquisitor, we're talking a fully qualified knight turned into a enforcer of Vader's will. So the way I kind of see the Temple Guardian turns is, if there was more than one Temple Guardian that got turned, they could have had too many Grand Inquisitor level Inquisitors. But with Padawans, you can still get Force wielders to support Vader's efforts, which is why with Seer's apprentice being the second sister, we actually see a very powerful, not Sith, but not a Sith assassin, in the same vein that we had Darth Maul and Asajj Ventress. So with Seer being a master, of course, having her become a Grand Inquisitor would have been the most natural course, right? Be the Grand Inquisitor, but having the Temple Guard turned Grand Inquisitor instead, I think makes more sense, just because of what the Inquisitors are supposed to be. It does not make me wish any less that they had made Starkiller the Grand Inquisitor, because that's what I wanted, people.
Yeah.
But yeah, but talking about the Inquisitors a little bit, we've seen now, I want to say 5 Inquisitors, I think, total across the games and the Rebels TV series, right? Because we saw the Grand Inquisitor, we saw the second sister and the 9th sister, I believe, in Fallen Order, and then the 5th brother and the 7th sister in Rebels. Did I get those numbers right? Because I think those are right.
I feel like we saw one more brother in Rebels, because there were 3 Inquisitors when they went to face Maul.
Right. Yes, we did see another brother. I've forgotten his number, but yeah.
I think there's only maybe 2 or 3 that we haven't seen. I know I've looked into their story, and I think Ahsoka dispatched 2 of them, didn't she? Because her sabers are restored kyber crystals from their blood crystals.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was something to do with the Ilum crystals she has. But yeah, with respect to Order 66, those presumably former Padawans would have had to be broken and trained. We've seen the Inquisitor facility that was constructed by Darth Vader. Who do you think their masters were? Let's assume for a second that these were all Padawans that got turned into Inquisitors. Who do you think their masters were, and how do you think that all tied in from Order 66? Because I'm looking at Order 66 from the grand perspective of all the Jedi are dead, but then we see the Inquisitors and some of them aren't. So in Order 66, how do you think they differentiated the Padawans they were going to break from the ones they were just going to exterminate, because the order is kill all the Jedi. So that was something I've been trying to rationalize in my head. Like, do you think Sheev had a list or something of the Padawans he wanted?
Well, with Sheev, I think he did. I mean, when you look at one of those Clone Wars arcs, you know, he hijacked like 4 Force user children, sent them on to Mustafar, and was going to execute a plan there. So I think he definitely had some in mind, like for who he's going to go after. And if I think in the Darth Vader comics, he pulled Vader alongside with him, and they entered like this little training room, and there were Inquisitors already there, and the Grand Inquisitor. And that's, again, they didn't know who Vader was. So I feel like this is like right after Vader was made. So again, that list that you said is probably 100% accurate. Sheev knew who he wanted to convert.
Yeah, kind of like he knew he wanted Anakin the first time he met the kid.
Yeah.
I like that. I really like that idea, though, that Palpatine had his this is my golden boy and girl list, and this is the list of Inquisitors I want. Because we know that the Inquisitors are basically Vader's private hunters force, I guess. And that they are connected to Darth Vader directly, because we've seen in the comics Darth Vader is training these Inquisitors in the future. We've seen, because he runs the facility, he trains them eventually as well. In fact, it's even referenced in the Legends comic to a very small degree with the Crimson Empire ones, where we find out a little bit about the Imperial Royal Guard, the Red Guard, and how they were trained by Darth Vader to a very small degree as well. Like, the whole concept that Darth Vader is training some of the most dangerous enforcers the Empire will ever have makes total sense. Like, I never once questioned that. I'm like, of course Darth Vader would be the perfect guy. He's Anakin Skywalker, who is one of the best swordsmen. He is Anakin Skywalker, one of the most powerful Force wielders. He's Anakin Skywalker. He was the chosen one. He makes perfect sense to be the perfect trainer for the elite.
Yeah.
But when I see the Inquisitors, I always wondered about that list. Like, I wonder if we'll ever see the names too. Like, because we know kinda who some of them ended up being. Like, we know that the Grand Inquisitor was a Temple Guard, but we never got his name. We never got the names of any of the other ones. I know we got the second sister's name, who I'm blanking on it right now, but I know we got her name. But I wonder if we'll ever actually see the list. Like, how Palpatine chose this. Because that would be an interesting arc, I would say, for story. Like, how Palpatine chose his golden boys and girls to become his Inquisitors.
Sorry.
No,
you made me realize something. So it may not 100% have been Palpatine choosing all of these people to be his Inquisitors, so much as maybe they were the ones who chose that path. If you look at Krell, he was full on, and he literally says, like, my new master is going to take me on, like, a change is coming. So it could be a lot of these, and he was a knight, I believe.
Yeah, he was a Jedi commander, but he was a knight. He wasn't a master, I don't think. But no, you're totally right. Like, I'm sure Palpatine had put some feelers out right away to try and find some powerful fighters, and Krell would have been a great choice. He's big, he uses 2 double-bladed lightsabers, he's fast, he's actually really powerful. It would have made sense. But with the inability to maintain that list because of the Clone Wars, because you never know, because the droids he had technically no control over. So the droids are going to kill whatever they can so that they can thin out the herd, and it kind of bred the most powerful Jedi to become the remainders. So when Palpatine finally gets to choose his Inquisitors, he gets to do so from a very, very finely culled list. Yeah, that's actually a good point. Yeah, that would make total sense, actually, now that I think about it. So that's probably what he did then. He probably just chose from what was left because they were going to be the best.
Yeah.
Oh, man, that paints a whole new image.
Well, that makes me wonder, like, because you said feelers, it makes me legit wonder, like, because so obviously certain Jedi could feel a disturbance in the Force. If you look at, like, Sifo Dyas, he sensed something was coming, so he went to make the clone army. That backfired. And then, you know, with Krell, you know, maybe Palpatine let his guard down on purpose to let maybe certain Jedi, or maybe specifically let Krell sense a change or sense something, so that Krell would be tempted and would turn. And, you know, like you said, prospects for Inquisitors. So, and then it's just they're being called out by, you know, the Clone Wars, the strongest on top. So,
I mean, when you have a 3-year-long galaxy-wide war happening, you're obviously only going to keep the best of the best, because there's no way anyone else is going to survive that. And it lasted like 3 years of intense fighting. It wasn't a couple major sieges here, a couple major skirmishes there. No, we're talking galaxy-wide, constant fighting. Yes, there were
Mhm.
major missions on certain planets. We see that in the Kashyyyk. We see that in the Siege of Mandalore to a very small degree. We see that on Felucia. We see that on, well, pretty much everywhere. We see it everywhere. But there's
Mhm.
still some planets that are left on the outside. We see planets where smaller skirmishes were happening. We see a lot of space combat throughout the Clone Wars. Like, it's constant. So only the best could survive that kind of environment. So, yeah. Wow, I think we just cracked the whole Inquisition there.
Yeah, we solved the case.
There we go. We know it all now. But obviously, like, if they actually come out with more content on it, I'm really excited to check out whatever they're going to do for that medium. So whether it be comics or books, I'm so excited to find out.
Yeah.
But that brings us to the last thing about the Order 66, in my opinion, where we talk about what it bred. Because, like, we see the survivors list. Like, I'm looking at. I've got only a few major survivor players on my little list here that I like to reference as my big names. So, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, Kanan Jarrus, Cal Kestis, Cere Junda, and Ahsoka Tano are my big six. Obviously, there's more, because I actually saw the list of the recognized canon survivors, and it's actually quite a long list. There's about, like, 50-odd Jedi on it sometimes, depending on which list you see and who thinks of which Jedi. And also if you include Darth Maul and Asajj Ventress, because technically they survived. But they weren't Jedi, but they were, yeah. Anyway, like, when you look at the list in the grand spectrum, it's quite big. But we're still talking going from thousands of Jedi down to, like, 50. So it's a very effective culling. Obviously, the purge is huge and it worked, which is scary, but it makes sense. But when I'm looking down that list, if I go down that list, some of those characters are directly involved in the future Rebel Alliance. And I become curious immediately, because I mean, we know that Commander Rex was actively involved in the Rebel Alliance. It's now been fandom recognized that he was on Endor.
Yeah.
Which I accept. I fully accept that. That's awesome. But then we see Kanan Jarrus and his team, who were actively members of a rebel cell. We see Ahsoka, who was one of the figureheads, the shadow figureheads of creating the Rebel Alliance. We see Cal Kestis and Cere Junda, who they are their, in a way, own rebel cell. They're a survivor cell that becomes connected with Saw Gerrera. They have contact with the Rebel Alliance, presumably later. We also see that in Obi-Wan Kenobi, who takes our future characters, Luke Skywalker, Leia, and Han, to rendezvous with the rebels and is involved with that process. Like, it's a bunch of because naturally, if you're a hero and you survived the Clone Wars, but you still oppose evil, you survived the Purge, you still oppose evil, you'll naturally get drafted into something again. Do you think the Rebel Alliance, because this is something I've toyed with, because we know the Rebel Alliance wasn't created overnight, it was created over a period of time. Do you think Ahsoka was part of the Rebel design from the very beginning? Or do you think she kind of just got drafted into it later when Bail Organa got involved? Because we know he was secretly funding the whole operation.
I think so. I mean, only because, like, her name Fulcrum. I mean, that's even the name she was rocking, or it was her call sign at the end of the last Clone Wars arc. So I think that it's something that she definitely helped instigate it. I mean, there's so many different, obviously more so legends, like beginnings of how the rebellion formed. And for me, I would like to think that Ahsoka played a huge hand in it, or maybe she was just a spy on the edge. I think when you look at, like, the heavy hitters for how the rebellion formed, I think it's your Mon Mothmas. I think it's your Bail Organa, all those characters that worked in the Senate that really instigated it. Totally. So I think, like, when you look at Force Unleashed and you have Starkiller rendezvousing all those Senate leaders, I think it's the same story. Just canon-wise, no Starkiller. It's just those guys, like, coming together.
Yeah,
so,
like, I definitely agree. I mean, everyone who has watched the streams, who is watching this podcast or listening to this podcast right now, you guys all know where I stand on Starkiller and him needing to be canon again. Everybody knows, it's no secret, that I believe Starkiller should 100% come back into the canon. And screw you, Disney, for taking him out in the first place. But I also recognize that he has no place in the real canon. So, steering away from that, having those canon that canon figurehead be a Jedi makes sense to me as well, because Kanan and Hera Syndulla pushing their own rebel cell to be heroes of the rebellion, to be the ultimate rebel cell, is 100% right. Like, a Jedi would naturally go to do the right thing again, especially if he had the right motivator at his back.
Hmm.
Because Jedi Padawan are very easily influenced. That's the whole thing. It backs up to the Inquisition again, where the Inquisitors are very easily influenced because they're Padawans. They're young. They don't know. But seeing characters like Kanan Jarrus and Ahsoka Tano, who we're assuming they're nearer to the older side as Padawans, so that when time enough passes for them to grow into their own, they find the right people to motivate them to do the right thing. I mean, Ahsoka was already there, but Kanan would naturally try to find someone who would motivate him to do the right thing.
That's interesting. You say that, because I think it was definitely Hera that motivated him, but
Mm-hmm.
he was definitely, the more they interacted with the main rebel force. I think Kanan, wasn't he a little bit hesitant on it too? I think he
Oh,
liked just
100%.
the isolation of just their cell and their family. He didn't feel gung ho, and Hera had to convince him of that.
Yeah, what I liked about that actually was that perception of the Rebel Alliance being like, how can we trust them? Totally stems from the shell shock he would have, that PTSD from the frickin' Order 66 purge.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
okay, we're talking about a secret shadowy force that is single-handedly trying to take on the entire empire. And what do we know about them? We know nothing about them. Why the hell should we trust them? Because they're giving us no information. And the last time I trusted people just implicitly, they betrayed me, killed my master, and drove me to a point where I can't even wear my lightsaber in public out of fear of being publicly executed for
Yeah.
just being a Jedi. Like, it makes total sense, and it's definitely a PTSD thing for him to be that hesitant to trust again. He won't trust people he can't directly interact with and can't read their minds, essentially, is kind of the way I see it, because at this point he has to trust almost wholeheartedly in what the Force can tell him about a person. And if he doesn't know who they are, he can't do that.
Hmm.
Which I really like, actually. I like that possible perception that he has, but I also like that fear and how it's very real, and it totally makes sense. He becomes more accepting over the course of the Rebel series, and we see that in his development of his connection to the Force when he loses his sight, in his working with Ahsoka and learning that, okay, you are also a Jedi survivor, and his retrusting of the clone trooper Rex, former clone trooper Rex. No, he's a clone trooper. That guy will die a clone trooper, let's be honest here. But like he develops that relationship and he develops that strength. And we definitely see that, and he becomes more open about it. But he doesn't start that way. And nor should we expect him to. Order 66 ruined these people. So, like, because we talked about it when we talked about the Padawans and that whole seeing your big brother gunned down by your dad kind of thing.
Hmm.
Like, yeah. But I also like to think Ahsoka was probably a big figurehead, like a huge center point.
Absolutely.
Like, it makes perfect sense. And
Hmm.
being connected with Bail, she already knew Bail. Like, that connection has been pre-established. She
Hmm.
already had that connection. So Bail saying, I want to do the right thing, because Bail is one of those non-Jedi people who watched Padawans get gunned down on a landing platform, watched the clones betray the Jedi, and at the same time had to run away because he's now being accused of being almost like a criminal or being a potential traitor as well.
Hmm.
Like, it's he established a connection with Obi-Wan and Yoda almost right away. He helped Yoda and Obi-Wan. He hid them. He hid Leia. He was doing the right thing every single time. And so he was a person, like, I would argue he's probably the motivator behind Ahsoka's actions, just by being a guy who wants to do the right thing.
I would think you're right. To me, he's that person that everyone in the Rebel Alliance is like, well, I want to be good friends with Bail because he knows where all these Jedi are.
Oh yeah, like he's the connected one.
Yeah.
Oh, I loved that though. Like, just seeing the evolution. Okay, so as many times as we've seen the Rebel Alliance be created, we know only one thing for sure, and that is Mon Mothma and Bail Organa are an active part immediately.
Yeah.
Mon Mothma is a senator for positive change, and has always been, and Bail Organa is a senator who believes in equality and the right thing. So we're seeing
Yeah.
two strictly pure of heart, light side type people who want to guide the galaxy to a brighter future. Seeing the dissolution of the Senate and the collapse of democracy in the galaxy leading to the Empire's development after Order 66 totally makes sense that they would want to lead it into the future. And I really like to think that having a positive motivator for change that is not a Jedi, to help the Jedi find the fight again, because they're all dealing with PTSD at this point. They've all lost everything. They need someone to help them stand back up again. So I think it really is I'm going to call them normies just to keep it simple. The normies are saying, you can make a change. You can be a symbol for change. So let's do that. Like, I think the Jedi themselves would never have gotten there. We even see that in Cal. Cal would not have done that himself. He was he wasn't happy, but he was perfectly content to never do anything again except hide and scrap.
Yeah.
And that makes sense to me. That's the fear. That's the paranoia, and truly the active stress that comes from, I'm a hunted criminal if people know what I am. But if people don't know, I'm nothing. And I'm good with that, because nothing is better than dead.
Yeah, well, you have, with the only exception of it being, I think, Obi-Wan Kenobi being so humble in his ways, just still saying, like, may the Force be with you. All these other Jedi in canon, they're not saying, may the Force be with you anymore. You have the normies in Rogue One saying, may the Force be with us, may the Force be with you, because they're holding on to that hope. And like you said, they're being that role model for these Jedi.
Oh, totally.
So
I think that in and of itself was the most powerful part, like knowing that the non-Force sensitives are the ones who are believing that the Force is there to guide them and protect them because they're doing the right thing. It's I don't want to say almost religious, but it definitely has a religious context attached to it. And it doesn't seem to matter that Order 66 was the destruction or supposed complete annihilation of the light side of the Force. In reality, Order 66, like this is going to be the part where I kind of jump into closing remarks here when I basically say Order 66 was the rebalancing. It was the recalibration of the scales. Yeah.
Yes.
That's what it was, though. Like, look at it from the grand perspective. We're talking about the most powerful Sith in history, Darth Sidious, and the chosen one of the Force, the most powerful, Sith apprentice, basically, became the figureheads and spearheads of the entire galaxy, with the Jedi being all but eliminated. But now the scales are even, because all the Jedi we have, they're nowhere near as powerful as Sidious and Vader are together. And that is what Order 66 was. It's the Force taking a look over and saying, oh, we screwed up on those scales. Okay, let's just take some of those off of that side real quick. There we go. Okay, it's all even now. Like, that's what it was, though. As dark and horrible and haunting as the imagery, the actions, and of course the many scenes we've seen of the events of Order 66 was, all it did was restore the equilibrium in the galaxy. The Force went from all the way light to, okay, where do we go from here? And when the Jedi started dying out a little bit, the dark side started to get a little stronger, because the Jedi that are repressing their Force powers are disappearing. Some are falling to the dark side because it's the natural, easy progression, because they don't know what to do. And some are sticking to the light because they're being motivated by the right people. And you see the scale kind of stay pretty even until it tips slightly too far with the Emperor creating the second Death Star. And then Episode 6, I like to think, was when Luke threw the Emperor into the shaft, which we now realize wasn't his permadeath, but when Luke rebalanced the scales, he reset everything to be too light. Because we still see that in the form of later on, anyways, seeing Luke's Jedi Academy suddenly topple to Kylo Ren in the Knights of Ren in the later series. Like, Order 66 was necessary at the time that it happened. It doesn't make it a good thing, but it absolutely made it, like, so much more powerful, I think, for seeing the future of the galaxy unfold.
Well, that's like, yeah, you have the Mace Windu and all these Jedi Masters saying, is he not the one to bring balance to the Force? Well, he did, just not in the way that they were expecting.
Exactly.
So, and like, I know this is probably, I think the Mandalorian Jedi Wars or whatever, like, well, that's not where I'm going with that. I guess, like, it's more Legends of the Sith and the Jedi Wars with, well, maybe it is canon because Bane talked about it. So I would say it's canon. So when you look at that, when you have all these Sith and all these Jedi, I feel like in that level sense, that is a form of balance, because both sides are very powerful, and it's just, they're even. Well, not one is greater than the other.
Yeah.
And then after that, obviously, I couldn't agree more. This is just the way the Force is balancing things out. And again, with Luke trying to rise up the Jedi and just the Force changing and creating balance, when you have during the Clone Wars the light side being so powerful, you have Krell and you have Barriss turning to the dark side because the dark side is trying to rise to balance.
Yeah.
And it's just that there's so many of these subtle examples of the Force working like that throughout
Totally.
like the Clone Wars. So
Totally. Like, yeah. So Order 66 was the true balancing thing. It was the major balancing that needed to happen for the galaxy. Uh yeah. Bottom line is here, guys, I don't think the Order 66 was a good thing, but I think it was the right thing for the story. That's it.
yeah,
Plain and simple. I like a lot of the Jedi, and I really liked a lot of the clone troopers. I'm sad to see that the Clone Wars series has officially ended, but holy crap, did it end well. It ended exactly how it needed to. We saw yet another angle of Order 66, so it's going to be on my mind probably. I'm probably still going to be thinking of stuff even after this episode and after future stuff too, just like seeing how it plays off in later series. We'll probably see more stuff about it in the future in spin-off books and stuff, but yeah. But I want to thank everybody out there for listening. I want to thank Taylor. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. Taylor, where can they find you?
yeah. Well, if you want to see more of me, check out my other podcast I'm on with my other co-compadres, GeekVerse podcast. So I just want to say thank you for having me on this show. I appreciate it. I hope I get to come back in the future.
Totally, yeah. Thank you so much for joining me. And everyone, I hope you have a great rest of your day, week, month, year, however you want to interpret it. And as always, may the Force be with you.
Always.